What's up everyone, this is Cloud Chief, and in today's video I am giving an in-depth thought and look over the new Ambuscade weapons and how they compare to REMA's. So now let's actually jump into my thoughts on these weapons since they are now in their final form. Some people are going crazy over it, some people are saying that these outright beat REMA's and they're better than REMA's, and so I want to touch on my thought on how these weapons are. First off, I want to say pretty much across the board, depending on how your drop rate is for the pulse weapon, they could be a decent bit easier than getting, say, a relic, because honestly I feel relics are really easy to get, but it also could potentially be harder. It just kind of comes down to how difficult is it to get that pulse weapon. Getting the points in Ambuscade is not that hard, and just that aspect is a joke, and even just getting the Kaja weapon is still just a really good weapon. So even if you don't have the final upgrade, it is still kind of beats out any other weapon that isn't a REMA in my opinion. But now the question is that everyone wants to know, are these better than REMA's? It's not a straight answer that I think you can just outright go into, because the thing about 11 is we have the options to be able to switch gear on the fly, and it gives us the opportunity to severely micromanage and set things up in situations. So here's the thing. Can these Ambuscade weapons in their final form beat out REMA's in certain situations? Absolutely. They can definitely do just, ridiculous damage. Are they better than REMA's in every single situation? Definitely not, and I'm going to go into that. So, the big thing and the big draw about these weapons are it's taking the quested weapon skills and really pushing up their damage. Yes, with the final upgrade, there's some additional effects, and really outside of the polearm, you're really locking yourself into one weapon skill. The polearm's the only exception just because it is giving you a really high crit rate on your weapon skills. And for me personally, I love crit. Making sure you're getting critical hits is where you're going to get the maximum amount of damage. Since the polearm is making you crit at least 50% of the time, obviously if you have more gear slapped on there, it's only going to get higher. It just makes pretty much any weapon skill that you're going to be using with the polearm pretty good. So, but that one's kind of by itself. As for the rest of the Ambuscade weapons, the thing about it is they're really locking you in for the most part into using that one weapon skill. So we'll take the Kaja Axe for example. People were going crazy over the Kaja Axe because it had 120% damage increase to decimation. And while decimation wasn't the worst weapon skill out there, it was still a pretty decent weapon skill, and to give it such a significant boost, increase the damage by a lot. But if we look at the augments that are on the axe, it's going better in skill chains. How often are you going to be doing a multi-step skill chain where you're throwing in decimation every, 2 to 3 weapon skills? The weapon's going to fall behind as soon as you're not doing decimation. These weapons actually really force you into using the main weapon skill, which is where the most draw is. And if you happen to not be doing that weapon skill, it's going to drop in damage a lot, making these weapons a very niche type weapon, and so that's why I see certain situations they are going to fall behind. But if you are in a situation where you're going to be spamming that one weapon skill, these weapons are going to perform extremely well. If it's locking you into doing one weapon skill, unless you have it set up with a group where you're going to be getting certain skill chains spamming these weapons, then you're not going to be really doing skill chain as much. So these aren't anywhere near as strong for skill chains. In certain situations, skill chains can actually be absolutely amazing. It's limiting you into a certain thing. And yes, again, if you are doing that certain thing, it's going to be doing amazing. But I just don't like the fact of how restrictive it kind of makes them to make them so good. But now back to the underlining question is, are these better than REMA's? Well, let's go down the list. In general, these beat out relics. I do think, in general, you are just going to get higher overall damage with the Ambuscade weapons than you are going to be with relic counterparts for the most part. So are these better than Mythics? Mythics are really geared towards the job. So if we go ahead and pull out Tizona for Blue Mage, on top of the draw of it just doing ridiculous damage, you actually get MP back. Well, none of these weapons are going to do anything for really blue for getting MP back unless you're starting to use certain weapon skills with certain weapons that aren't even the main draw of these weapons, which again I think is just going to really fall behind. Like I said, typically mythics, have a certain niche thing. Now, like, I think the katana is going to be better than the mythic katana for ninja, because again, the main draw to that is to use the 2 hour that augments that, and it's like, okay, you get re-raise when you blow up, but like, who's doing that on ninja? So again, that's really situational, and it's not easy to really make a straight comparison, especially considering mythics are really geared for the job. Is the staff going to be better than mythic for summoner? Absolutely not. I don't think in any situation, one, summoner doesn't want to be within AoE range hitting the mob, but even if you are in AoE range hitting the mob and trying to do damage with the staff, plus throwing in the damage you can with your avatar in there, you're not going to compete with the damage you would get from standing back and, just using Nirvana by having your avatar leveled up. It's just not going to happen. So it is going to come down to the individual for mythics, but I think for the most part, I think it's typically going to fall behind, because you're typically going to be using a mythic for a specific reason, as opposed to just trying to get bonkers numbers that you are going to be using these Ambuscade weapons for. So that moves me on to Empyreans. Are these better than Empyreans? I personally do not think so. The big thing is with Empyreans, I love the aftermath effect that you get with Empyreans. It allows your white damage to just go through the roof. On top of all that, you only need to do the weapon skill that comes with the weapon just to get your aftermath up. Once your aftermath's up, you have it until it ticks down and runs out until you need to worry about putting it up. So it frees you up to do other weapon skills. So you can do other weapon skills to chain, and it just allows you more freedom, plus increasing your white damage. Are there going to be situations that you could put these Ambuscade weapons in where it will beat out an Empyrean? Yes, but again, overall, I still think Empyreans are going to be better. It gives you more freedom. It allows you, like I said, your white damage to be really good, and often I think people write off white damage. I just don't see it, for the most part, beating out Empyreans. Again, you can set up a situation, and if you're in that niche situation, by all means, use it over an Empyrean if you have both. But again, I like the freedom that Empyrean gives me. I just need to use the weapon skill that comes on the weapon once to get aftermath up. Then I'm free to do whatever, whether it's skill chain or, self skill chain or skill chain with my party. Do whatever I need to do to try and maximize damage. Overall, in looking at all situations, I think Empyreans are going to be better than the Ambuscade weapons. So that comes to Aeonics. Are these better than Aeonics? If you're going to be skill chaining and trying to get the Radiance or Umbral to go off, plus that increases magic bursts if you happen to be in a situation where you're magic bursting, I think it's going to fall behind. You're not going to be getting as many skill chains with the Ambuscade weapons. Aeonics are more focused and driven towards skill chains, plus they are easier to skill chain than any other, type of weapon. Aeonics typically allow more chains because it gives an additional property than any other weapon. So again, I think across the board it's going to fall short. You could find a situation where they'll do more damage, but I think as an overall, looking at every type of situation, that you are just going to be better off with Aeonics in a broader sense. I know people kind of want a rating to be like, oh, so what's the best weapon here, and what in order should I get them? Again, it's all subjective. It comes down to the jobs that you played, but if I have to just look at the weapons by themselves and say what is the best, I have to first go with Polearm, because it has such a high crit rate for when you're weapon skilling, which actually brings me up to a small point that I want to talk about, and that's that I see people be like, oh, well, the polearm's broken, it's making other weapon skills crit that couldn't crit before. I have always stood by the stance that all weapon skills can crit. And the thing about that is I've even gone and tested it. I remember I was doing a stream where I had someone come in the stream and was actually he was talking in chat, and then I was talking back and forth, and we were talking about like Ragnarok, and the point that I was talking about was crits, and then he's like, well, resolution can't crit. We kept going back and forth, and then eventually I was like, so where is your evidence? And he just said his evidence was he reads a lot of information, to just trust him. That is a horrible basis, in my opinion, for evidence. And after that, at the current time, I personally did not have Ragnarok in a situation that I could test it. But luckily, I had a friend who did. So we went out on Paladin White Mage and went out to Ravine on Frogs, considering that would be very easy to test and be consistent, and figured out and proved that it can in fact critical hit. Here's the thing though, it will not critical hit without outside help. If I go in again on, say, Paladin White Mage, have no critical hit plus gear on, then yes, it will not ever crit. It will always just do, whatever damage it's going to do based on my TP and not really have any variance. However, as soon as we slapped Ragnarok on with no aftermath, we all of a sudden started seeing that we would get an 800 damage increase per hit it would crit about 10% of the time. And as soon as we started slapping on more critical hit or had aftermath going on, we would see again an increase in the damage. And considering again we were Paladin White Mage, made sure we had no gear that was multi-hit, there was no way for the weapon skill to multi-hit to increase the damage. The only increase in damage we would have ever gotten was from critical hits, and I've always stood by that, and therefore I don't think the polearm's broken. All weapon skills can crit, it's just you need outside help to do it. So yes, the polearm, because of it being able to crit and have such a high crit rate on any weapon skill you do, by far I think excels to the top. What is next best? I would say sword and dagger kind of are in the same league, so to speak. And dagger is really good for crit. So many jobs can use dagger. Plus, evisceration is such a good weapon skill even before this weapon. So when you add on additional damage for it on top of that, plus the fact that you're either high critting from having high TP for evisceration, or you're having high crit of low TP because of the effect of the dagger, it's just a really good weapon. Savage Blade's always been good, so sword is good. Plus, if you're super buffing, just the more buffs you get, the more attack you're getting on sword. That is also a really good weapon. Axe is a really good weapon. I don't think it's held up as good with the final upgrade because, again, I don't see you really skill chaining much with Decimation. And yes, I could try and extend the skill chain to get, if I'm going to end with Decimation, to make it better. But then if I got to use another weapon skill to do that, to extend the chain to try and get that increased damage, I'm lowering the damage because I'm not doing Decimation. I mean, Axe is really good, but unless you're Decimation spamming, you're not going to get as good damage, and you're not going to really be skill chaining a whole lot and getting high step skill chains if you're just spamming Decimation, even with other people, unless you set up some really complicated setup where you're very calculated on what you would do. And that just doesn't seem intuitive or simple or stuff that's going to typically happen with a pickup group or if you're just randomly going out doing stuff. So I feel the axe somewhat falls behind compared to the other weapons, how they've kind of pushed up. And then I'd say the next really good weapon is the club. Not that really clubs are used much, but Black Halo has always been a pretty decent weapon skill in terms of damage if you are using club. So if you're in a situation where you gotta, bust out, the club for blunt damage, it's really good, and just the damage increase you get from that. I've seen some people actually say that they don't really, think the club is all that great. I honestly think it's really good, but again, it's going to be a niche situation. It's going to be when you need blunt damage. Also, the stats on the club are really good for nuking low-tier damage spells. So casting Helixes on Scholar or using spells like Subduction on Blue will get a pretty decent damage boost from the club. I mean, if you're going to bust out a club for damage, I don't think anything can touch it. I think it is probably by far the best club in the game if you need club to do damage. Definitely think it should be rated up there, you know, in terms of weapons. As for the rest of the weapons, they're good if you need to use them, but I kind of feel that they fall behind. Like I said, personally like the polearm, then really the sword and dagger, then the axe, and then the club in terms of really usefulness. If I had every single job leveled, that's probably the order I would try and obtain these weapons as. It would be polearm, sword and dagger, axe, and then club. Obviously, you can shuffle things around if you felt, oh, well, I don't really need the axe, I'd rather have the club. Stuff situational. You need to assess your own situation on what would be best. But that is personally what I would do if I was looking at a situation where I had all jobs. So, there we go. It was quite a long video, but I felt, covered a lot of very useful information. I'm actually surprised at how good these weapons are, and that SE just gave us this good of weapons that you can get from Ambuscade. Outside of really obtaining the pulse weapon to be able to, make these things, it is honestly a joke compared to obtaining an ultimate weapon. And considering, like I said, you can definitely set up situations where if you're just talking straight damage, these things can clearly beat out REMAs, and in certain situations. I don't think that they are better than REMAs across the board in every situation, and in most situations I would much rather have an ultimate weapon than these if I had to just pick one. But that is my personal preference. And that about covers everything with these weapons that I know at this point. If you got some value out of this video, go ahead and hit the like button. And if there's a particular weapon that you really like, go ahead and leave a comment of which weapon that is. I hope you guys got some value out of this. Thank you for supporting the channel. And as always, may you have success in all you do.